The video loaded in the blue glow of my phone like a door I didn't want to open. Snow whispered against the Seattle window, and my apartment felt smaller than it had that morning. A living room I knew by heart, our living room in Arizona, filled the screen with gold light. The tree was taller than last year, the gifts stacked in jewel-colored towers, and somewhere behind the camera, my cousin's voice laughed. Annual Williams family Christmas feast. My brother crossed the frame in a brand new sweater, my sister knelt by the fireplace, and my mother, hair glossy, lips bright, lifted a flute of champagne to my father's grin. He tapped his glass and said, "To everyone who matters." I didn't drop the phone. My fingers simply forgot how to hold it. The room tilted. The candle on my coffee table breathed out the faintest curl of cinnamon smoke. My apartment's heater clicked on and hummed like it was trying to comfort a person. I watched the video again anyway, and then I paused it to zoom in on a cream card propped on the mantel, family only. December 25th, 3:00 p.m. The words shone like ice. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been left out by the very people you kept showing up for, hit the like button and share this with someone who'll understand. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next, because what happened after that toast changed everything. But to understand why that single sentence, "everyone who matters," landed like a knife, you need to know how we got here. I grew up in Willowbrook, the kind of Arizona town where porch lights stay on until teenagers wander home and the grocery clerk asks after your mother by name. We were the Williamses on Elm, the house with the big front window, and the plastic reindeer Dad zip-tied to the roof every December. Christmas wasn't a holiday so much as a season that ran on hot cocoa, old carols, and the slow ritual of unpacking our lives from labeled bins, mantel tree, front porch. Mom would smooth the skirt around the trunk like she was tucking a child in. Dad would drive us after dinner to see the lights, his travel mug steaming up the glass. We wore matching pajamas on Christmas Eve and opened one gift each. Always socks, always useful, always laughter anyway. I was the oldest, the one who learned early to translate chaos into calm. Teachers trusted me with the sign-up sheets. Coaches handed me the extra key to the equipment room. At Arizona State, I studied computer science because it felt like the grown-up version of the same impulse: find the bug, fix the system, keep things running. When Tech Fusion called from Seattle with a starting salary that made my parents gasp, I looked at the desert one last time and headed north, promising I'd be home for every big moment. For a while, I kept that promise like a vow. Flights back for Thanksgiving, red-eye returns after New Year's FaceTime calls made from airport food courts. Then 3 years ago, Dad called sounding older. "They let me go, princess," he said. 20 years at the manufacturing plant ended with a handshake and a cardboard box. He was 54. I was in the break room at work, wearing a company hoodie, absolutely sure of who I was and what I could do. "Don't worry," I said, already opening my banking app. "I've got you." It started with 2 mortgage payments, then a winter of utilities, then a number that settled into my calendar like a second rent, $2,000, on the first of every month, no questions asked. "Just until I'm back on my feet," Dad would say. Mom would murmur, "Britt, you're an angel," and send a photo of the porch light glowing over the stone steps. I didn't feel like an angel. I felt like a daughter. I made spreadsheets, reworked my budget, cooked more at home. I was promoted twice. I started to think of my salary like a bridge spanning the miles between us. December arrived with that thin, special light that makes every morning feel like a secret. I stood at my Seattle window, watching rain sharpen into sleet, and thought of home. I'd bought the gifts early, and with a kind of quiet joy only the oldest child knows, one big thing, each thoughtful, useful, beautiful. A fishing set for Dad he'd never buy for himself. A silver locket for Mom, with our photos tucked inside. The new console Josh talked about like a dream. A laptop for Katie, because professors don't accept, won't boot as an excuse. I paid for extra care shipping and a holiday wreath for their front door, the kind that smells like cold air and hope. I called on a Wednesday night, 11 days before my flight. My living room was soft, with lamplight, my work laptop blinking that tired blue eye. Mom answered. Her voice didn't sound like cocoa and cinnamon. It sounded like she'd put on a winter coat made of distance. Honey, she said, about Christmas. I sat down on the arm of the couch. Okay, we think it might be best to skip the big celebration this year. Money's tight and we're overwhelmed. I laughed kindly, I thought. Mom, I can help. We'll keep it small. I can even book dinner somewhere so no one has to cook. I already shipped the gifts. It's too much, she said, and the way she breathed around the words told me this wasn't about casseroles. We're just going to stay in this year. Nothing special. Maybe save your vacation days. I pictured the porch light and the wreath and the swirl of peppermints in a crystal bowl. What about Josh and Katie and the cousins? Dad got on the phone, voice warm like always. Princess. Just a quiet day for us. We'll do something this summer when things calm down. There's a way a person repeats a lie so it starts to sound like furniture, solid, ordinary, unmovable. Just staying in. Nothing special? I pressed the heel of my hand to my forehead and stared at my little fake tree. Okay, I said, because I have always been the one to make hard things easier for other people. Okay. The next morning, I canceled my flight. The airline offered a credit. I told myself that was practical. I told myself 100 things. I suggested a video call for Christmas morning. Mom said their internet had been spotty. I offered to send the ingredients for cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate anyway. Dad texted that they were watching their sugar. Josh replied once. Yeah, tough year. Katie didn't, which was unlike her, and I told myself finals were brutal and friends were a balm. I kept my decorations anyway. A small tree in the corner, a strand of lights around the window, a cinnamon candle that made my apartment smell like memory. I worked late to empty my inbox and stacked the wrapped gifts from coworkers in a small triangle under the tree. I set aside my own care package, ham potatoes, a bag of green beans because ritual is a rope you hold when the current pulls hard. Christmas morning rose quiet as church. No calls, no group text with Dad's bad puns. The city outside my window softened under clean snow. I boiled coffee, let the steam fog the glass, and left cheerful voicemails with my voice held steady like a cup too full. Merry Christmas, I said. I hope you're having the peaceful day you wanted. Then I turned on old carols and baked in a kitchen that felt like a stage where the other actors had missed their cues. By afternoon, loneliness had the sound of my own fork on my own plate. By evening, it had the weight of a blanket that didn't warm anything. Amy texted from Boston to check on me, sent a photo from our college graduation in a frame she'd mailed. Never forget who's in your corner, her note read. She asked if I'd looked at social media. I said I would later. I lied without meaning to. I was still protecting something I didn't have language for. It was after 8 when the stillness started to feel like a dare. I opened Instagram because I told myself maybe there'd be nothing there. The notification popped up like it had been waiting for me. Jackson Williams went live 30 minutes ago. I tapped. What the camera found in that house was a memory-made expensive garlands braided with lights. A table set with china my father at the carving board and a crisp button-down I'd never seen. The frame moved, and there they all were. My brother with his knee slung over the arm of the couch, my sister on the floor surrounded by gift tags, my mother opening a small velvet box and touching a diamond at her throat. Behind them, along the mantel, a neat row of cream cards, family only, like a rule I had somehow forgotten to follow. I watched my father raise his glass. To family, he said. To everyone who matters. Here's what betrayal feels like in a body. Your hands go cold first, as if they're smart enough to step away from heat. Your chest tightens, as if someone has drawn a belt through your ribs. Your ears ring, but not with noise, more with a pressure that means don't trust the sound of anything. I set the phone on the coffee table, and the candle flickered, struggling with a draft. I watched it again because a person always watches again. I noticed the unopened boxes I'd shipped my paper, my handwriting stacked to the side like a delivery mistake no one had time to correct. I noticed my mother's dress was new. I noticed how easily my brother laughed, how my sister's shoulders sat loose and untroubled. I noticed I'd been erased with care. I took screenshots like a witness. The invitation card, the champagne flutes, the pendant at my mother's throat catching the light as she kissed my father's cheek. The tree glittered heavy with glass. Jackson's audio caught a cousin's voice saying, "Britt would love this table," and another voice shushed a quick, efficient sound like a lid put on a pot. I sat there a long time, not moving while the snow pressed against the window. The apartment hummed brave and ordinary. Somewhere above me, someone's television laughed. I could smell cinnamon and ham, and none of it touched me. My throat burned, and my eyes finally flooded in a way that wasn't gentle. The kind of crying that empties a person clean. When the tears stopped, what remained was a stillness I recognized from late nights debugging code. The moment when the problem is no longer theoretical, it's a line you can point to on the screen. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and opened my bank app. 36 transfers, $2,000 each. A quiet, unquestioned river from me to them. My father's text history read like a script. "You're a lifesaver, princess." Just until it turns around, I scrolled to October and found a photo my mother had posted of a new entertainment system I hadn't noticed then. I scrolled to a summer reunion at a lakeside cabin that had included everyone. I scrolled to Thanksgiving lavish loud, where Dad looked rosy and expansive under amber lights. The heater shut off. The apartment exhaled. Outside, the streetlight burned a soft circle on the fresh snow. In that circle, a stray cat put its paw down and lifted it again, surprised by the cold. I stared at the last paused frame of the video, Dad mid-toast, mouth open on a word that had always included me. I thought about the porch light I'd imagined all month. Maybe it had been on. Maybe it hadn't. The truth was simpler than I wanted it to be. They hadn't canceled Christmas. They had canceled me. My phone buzzed on the table screen, lighting my empty plate. A new message from my father rolled across the glass with cheerful efficiency. "Hope you had a nice Christmas, princess. Quick question. Can you help with the mortgage on Monday? The usual $2,000 would be great. Thanks in advance." The candle's flame guttered, then steadied. I watched it for a beat, hand hovering over the phone without touching it. In the quiet, something inside me shifted like a door clicking open at last. And in that narrow, new space, the room felt different, larger, colder, honest. The candlelight threw a small gold circle across my table, the only warm thing left in that room. My phone screen still glowed with my father's message, the words neat and casual, as if the world hadn't just fallen apart. I stared at it until the letters blurred. The silence around me grew too heavy, so I set the phone face down and let it stay that way. The apartment was dark, except for the tree lights blinking in slow rhythm. Outside, snow continued to fall soft and patient. I remember standing at the window, watching it settle on the ledge, and realizing I couldn't remember the last time my family had asked how I was doing. Every call for 3 years had begun and ended with the same small word, help. I had mistaken that word for love. The heater clicked again. The hum filled the room like a heartbeat, trying to keep me calm. But calm wasn't what I felt. Beneath the quiet was a slow ache of disbelief, the kind that makes you question if any of it had ever been real. I turned the phone over again, not to read the message, but to scroll back. Each thread told the same story. My father's, "You're a lifesaver," after every transfer. My mother's gentle. We don't know what we'd do without you. Rows of gratitude that now looked like ledgers. I'd wanted to believe I was holding my family together. I hadn't seen that I was the one being held in place. A faint knock broke the silence, just the sound of a neighbor's door closing somewhere down the hall. But it startled me enough to breathe again. I made tea, the motion giving my hands something to do. The kettle whistled softly, the cup warmed my palms, and I tried to decide if I should call Amy. It was nearly midnight in Boston. I called anyway. She answered, half-awake voice, rough and kind. I didn't mean to cry right away, but hearing her say my name undid whatever wall I'd built to stay composed. The words tumbled out, the video, the decorations, my unopened gifts in the corner of that room. The toast, about everyone who matters. She listened without interrupting, only the small sound of her breathing on the line. When I ran out of words, she whispered, "They didn't just forget you, Britt. They used you." The words sat between us sharper than anything I'd said. Used. It was simple and ugly and true. I wiped my face with my sleeve and said it aloud once, just to hear how it sounded in my own voice. Used. It didn't echo. It settled. I promised her I'd sleep, but when we hung up, I didn't even try. Instead, I opened my laptop and began looking for proof. Not to argue with anyone, just to see it plain. On social media, every photo was another thread pulled loose from the story I'd believed. There were barbecues, birthdays, vacations, smiling faces under the same roof I'd paid to keep. They hadn't struggled. They'd simply replaced honesty with performance, and I'd been their audience of one. The more I looked, the calmer I became. Anger would have been easier, but what I felt was something quieter, like the click of a door lock. I started saving screenshots, small pieces of evidence that made the lie undeniable. Every saved image felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of the truth. The snow outside thickened overnight. By dawn, the city was wrapped in a pale silence. I hadn't slept, but the exhaustion didn't matter. I made another cup of coffee and opened my banking app. $72,000 over 3 years, not counting emergencies or repairs. It wasn't just money. It was every plan I'd postponed. The house I hadn't bought, the trips I'd promised myself, the safety I'd traded for their comfort. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper and wrote down what I knew. Dates, amounts, details I could measure. Facts steadied me. They were things my parents couldn't argue away. Facts didn't lie to protect pride or convenience. By noon, I called Amy again. She stayed on the line while I sorted through the noise. "Check property records," she said gently. "You'll feel better knowing the truth." She was right. Within minutes, I found the county database and typed in their address. The screen blinked back proof that the mortgage had never fallen behind. No liens, no penalties. The house was safe because they'd never been in danger. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me cold in a way that felt almost clean. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment, the life I'd built brick by brick while sending my earnings somewhere they didn't belong. The air smelled of coffee and something else, resolve. I didn't answer any of their texts that day. They came in like clockwork, polite at first, then impatient. Dad's voice in my head saying, "Princess, did you see my message? Mom's soft sweetie, are you okay?" The words felt hollow now, the endearments used like keys that no longer fit the lock. That evening, I walked to the small park behind my building. The snow had stopped, and the air carried that still frozen quiet only winter knows. I sat on a bench dusted with frost and watched the city lights blink in the distance. Somewhere out there, families were sitting by their trees, passing by, arguing gently over music. I felt the loneliness of that, but also something steadier, the sense that I was finally standing on solid ground, even if it was cold. By the time I walked home, my decision was made. I wouldn't send another dollar. Not until the truth was acknowledged. I wasn't sure what that would mean yet, but silence felt safer than participation in a lie. The next morning, another message waited on my phone. Princess, we need to know if the money's coming Monday. Mortgage is due. I read it twice, then typed 2 words. Ask someone else. I didn't send it. Not yet. I deleted it and put the phone back down. I wanted my next move to be deliberate, not reactive. Instead, I spent the day closing every door they might still open. I went to my bank and met with a financial advisor named Eric. He had kind eyes and the kind of calm voice that made every problem sound solvable. I told him what happened, not all the pain, just the facts. He nodded slowly, his pen still. "You can stop the automatic transfers immediately," he said, "and we'll set alerts on all your accounts." I watched him type the changes, the quiet clicking sound almost ceremonial. When it was done, he looked up and said, "You've done the right thing." It felt strange to hear someone say that out loud. I walked out into the thin winter sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone vibrated again, but I ignored it. The messages could wait. For once, I didn't have to rush to fix anything. That night, I called Amy to tell her I'd made the changes. She let out a long sigh, half relief, half pride. "So what now?" she asked. I looked around my apartment, the small tree, the gifts still under it. The candle burned down to its last inch. "Now," I said, "I breathe." The days that followed were quieter than I expected. The first text was replaced by another, then another, the tone shifting from friendly to frustrated. Then came the guilt. "You know we count on you. Your father's health is fragile. We can't believe you'd punish us like this." Every word an old trick polished to look like love. I didn't respond. My silence became its own language. On the 3rd day, a new message arrived from my brother. "Hey sis, Mom's worried. Are you okay?" "Just checking." There was no mention of Christmas, no acknowledgement of what they'd done, just a question that wasn't really about me. I stared at it until my eyes blurred, then turned off the phone completely. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I cleaned my apartment, sorted through old papers, took long walks along the waterfront where the air smelled of salt and cold metal. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking to the buzz of another request. A week passed before my father's final message appeared. The tone was clipped practical. "We need to confirm the funds are coming. Don't make things harder than they already are." I read it at the kitchen counter while the coffee brewed and felt no panic, no sadness. Just the steady rhythm of clarity. I opened a new message and typed slowly. "Ask the family you chose." I sent it before I could think twice. The delivery notification flashed, then disappeared. I turned off the phone and set it aside. What came next was chaos on their end calls, texts, voicemails, all of them tumbling over one another. I listened to none of them. Instead, I lit the last candle, poured another cup of tea, and let the city move quietly outside my window. The snow had begun to melt, leaving small rivers along the sidewalks. I watched the water trace new paths through the ice, small and unstoppable. Inside me, something similar was happening. A thaw. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first small release of everything I'd been holding too tightly. I didn't know what I'd build from it or how the next conversation with my family would unfold. But for the first time, I felt sure of one thing. The silence was mine, and I wasn't giving it back. The morning after I sent that message, sunlight edged through the blinds like nothing had happened. The city went on as usual. Buses sighed at stoplights. Someone's dog barked down the hall. But inside my apartment, the quiet felt different. My phone sat face down on the counter, vibrating every few minutes with another call or text. I didn't touch it, not once. By the time I poured my second cup of coffee, the buzzing stopped altogether. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. I sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the thin frost melt from the glass. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't bracing for another request or apology that wasn't real. There was only me, the morning light, and a small sense of space where panic used to live. That peace lasted 2 days. Then came my mother's voicemail, long, breathy, layered with a tone she used when she wanted control, disguised as care. "Brittany, you need to stop this nonsense immediately," she said. "Your father and I have supported you your whole life. You wouldn't have your career without us. This is no way to repay us." Her voice sharpened, halfway through revealing more than she intended. "We have property taxes coming up, and we already paid a deposit on the cruise. You can't just abandon your family over one misunderstanding." The word cruise hung in the air like a bad joke. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. I replayed the last part once just to be sure I hadn't misheard it. A cruise. They had lied about losing their home while booking a vacation. I called Amy. When she picked up, I didn't say hello. They were never struggling, I told her. They booked a cruise. Her sigh was soft, but behind it came a quiet anger that matched my own. "I think you need someone objective in this, Britt," she said. "A therapist, maybe. This kind of betrayal, it rewires how you trust people." I didn't argue. The next morning, I found one. Her name was Dr. Klein, a calm woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and an office filled with plants. She didn't take notes during the first session. She just listened while I talked. My story came out in pieces, some sharp, some trembling. When I was done, she leaned forward and said, "What your parents did has a name. It's financial abuse. You were conditioned to believe your worth depended on saving them." The words landed like a slow revelation. Abuse. I'd never applied that word to my life before. But once she said it, I could see it everywhere, how easily guilt had become currency. How love had always been measured in what I could provide. She asked what I wanted now. I told her the truth. I want my life back. I want peace. The days that followed were measured by small acts of reclamation. I walked through my apartment with a trash bag collecting every envelope and receipt that reminded me of the years I'd sent money home. I filed the papers neatly in a box labeled closed accounts and slid it under my bed. Then I wrote emails to my landlord and utility companies explaining that any attempted payments from family members should be declined. I wasn't taking chances. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a gentle voice said, "Brittany, it's Aunt Sandra." She sounded hesitant, like she wasn't sure I'd want to hear from her. "I heard what happened. Jackson told me about the Christmas video. I had no idea they told you it was canceled." I leaned back in my chair. "They said money was tight," I said quietly. Turns out that wasn't true. There was a pause on her end. Then she spoke the words that would redraw everything I thought I knew. "Your father didn't lose his job 3 years ago. He took early retirement with a pension. They were never in danger of losing that house. They've just been living large, bragging about your generosity like it was their idea." I felt the air leave my lungs. They lied about everything I whispered. "Yes," she said, "and they made sure to keep you far enough away that you wouldn't see it." The conversation stretched between long silences. Aunt Sandra confessed that she had confronted my father during Thanksgiving, when he'd boasted about how well he had trained me to send money without question. "I was sickened," she said, "but I didn't have your number. I should have tried harder to reach you." Her honesty steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. For months, I'd questioned whether I'd overreacted, if maybe I'd missed something, or misunderstood their reasons. Now, hearing her words, the fog lifted completely. It hadn't been my fault. I thanked her for telling me, and for the first time, I meant it deeply. That night, I sat at my desk and drafted an email addressed to my parents and siblings. My fingers hesitated over the keys, but once I started, the words came easily. I wrote that I was aware of the deception that all financial support had ended permanently, and that future communication would only be possible if it began with honesty. I copied everyone on the message so there would be no confusion, no chance for twisted retellings. When I hit send, I felt no triumph, just a quiet exhale, as if I had been holding my breath for years. The replies arrived within minutes. My mother's first furious defensive. "After all we've done for you, this is how you treat us." "You've lost your mind, Brittany." My father followed with something colder. "You'll regret this when tax season comes. We've claimed some of your expenses for years." Josh's message tried to sound reasonable, but it was just another layer of pressure. "Look, nobody meant to hurt you. Cutting off support hurts everyone. Can't you just talk this out?" Katie's note was the only one that stung differently. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I should have told you about Christmas. I didn't know how." I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Dr. Klein before our next session. She read them silently, then said, "This is what control looks like when it loses its grip." Her words stayed with me. They gave meaning to the chaos of that week, the calls, the voicemails, the guilt-laced pleas. Every time my phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. 2 evenings later, I sat by my window again. The snow outside had begun to melt, leaving the streets slick with gray slush. The world felt in motion again, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to move with it. A week passed. The silence stretched longer each day, and the distance between us grew into something that felt permanent. Then, one morning, a letter arrived, handwritten, the envelope familiar in its looping script. My father's. I opened it slowly, expecting an apology. Instead, it began with numbers. A list of expenses, property costs, and a line that read, "Your contribution kept this family running." There was no "I'm sorry," no acknowledgement of deceit. Only a reminder of what I'd given. I folded the letter back into its envelope, slid it into a drawer, and locked it there. Some things didn't deserve space anymore. As winter loosened its hold, the air softened, and my routines began to feel like my own again. I went to work, met colleagues for lunch, joined Amy for weekend video calls that no longer revolved around family drama. Dr. Klein helped me build small rituals of independence, a savings goal, a list of people who added warmth to my life instead of taking from it. Then one afternoon, in February, Aunt Sandra called again. Her tone carried a quiet satisfaction. "Your parents missed their mortgage payment," she said. "They've been asking everyone in the family for loans. Nobody's giving them a dime. People finally see it now." I didn't feel joy or revenge, just a calm sense of balance. "Maybe they'll learn something from it," I said. Sandra chuckled softly. "Maybe. But even if they don't, you did. That's what matters." After we hung up, I walked outside. The air smelled of thawing earth, the first trace of spring hiding beneath the snowmelt. For years, I'd lived reacting to other people's emergencies. Now, each step forward felt deliberate. I wasn't fixing anyone. I was finally caring for myself. That night, I journaled for the first time since college. The words came quietly, steady as breath. I will no longer confuse obligation with love. When I finished, I closed the notebook and left it open on the desk, a promise to keep visible. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky outside my window glowed with a pale streak of orange. My phone was still, no new messages waiting. I brewed coffee, poured it into my favorite chipped mug, and stood by the window as the first light touched the city roofs. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace beginning. By the time spring came, the air had softened, and Seattle smelled faintly of rain and new grass. My life had begun to take on a steadier rhythm. I still woke early, brewed the same coffee, and watched the city blink to life from my window. But the silence that once felt hollow had become a kind of peace. I hadn't heard from my parents in weeks. The absence no longer frightened me. It felt earned. Most days, I focused on small things that anchored me in the present. Long walks after work dinners that didn't come from a microwave, evenings spent reading instead of checking my phone. It was quiet, but it was mine. Amy called often, usually while walking home from her office in Boston. We'd talk about her dog, her new project, and sometimes about what healing looked like. "You sound lighter," she said one night, her voice bright through the speaker. "You don't sound like you're waiting for them anymore." I smiled, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. Maybe I finally stopped. Then one morning in April, I opened my mailbox and found a letter addressed in my brother's handwriting. The envelope was worn around the edges like it had traveled too far before reaching me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. His words were shaky, the kind that come from someone learning how to tell the truth. He wrote that he'd been thinking about Christmas, about the way our parents had handled everything. At first, he admitted, "I was angry with you for cutting them off. But now watching them scramble and blame everyone but themselves, I think you might have been right. They told us you didn't want to come home, that you were too busy with work, too proud to deal with family stuff. We believed them because it was easier than questioning it. I'm sorry for that." He described how things had started to unravel since I stopped sending money. The mortgage was behind. The car had been sold. The house that had always felt like the family's anchor was now a weight they couldn't manage. "They argue all the time," he wrote. "Mom blames Dad for spending, Dad blames Mom for lying. It's ugly to watch. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. You have nothing to be sorry for. I just wanted you to know that the truth is finally catching up to them." At the bottom, he wrote one more line in smaller script. "I miss you. I'd like to fix things between us if you'd let me." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I folded the paper back into the envelope and sat for a long while staring at the window. A cloud of gulls circled over the harbor, their cries thin against the hum of the city. For the first time in months, the idea of my family didn't just bring pain. It brought a kind of wistfulness, fragile but real. That night, I called him. His voice was quieter than I remembered, older somehow. We stumbled over small talk for a few minutes, work weather. Nothing that mattered before he said, "I should have stood up to them, Britt. I just didn't want to believe they'd do that to you." "I know," I said. "It's hard to see people you love clearly." We talked until the streetlights outside my window glowed like small moons. By the time we hung up, I felt something loosen, a bridge beginning to rebuild, slow and careful, plank by plank. Katie reached out a few weeks later. Her message was short, but honest in a way she'd never been before. "I knew Christmas wasn't really canceled," she wrote. "I went along with it because I didn't want to cause trouble. That was cowardly. You didn't deserve that." I stared at her words, the admission simple but powerful. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I took a walk around the block, letting the cool evening air clear my thoughts. When I finally answered, I kept it plain. "Thank you for saying that. I still need time, but I'm glad you reached out." She sent back a heart, no words. It was enough. I started seeing Dr. Klein less often that spring. She said I was transitioning from survival to rebuilding a stage that looked less like crisis and more like choice. In one of our last sessions, she told me, boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that you decide when to open. I wrote it down in my journal that night, the way I used to jot down code snippets during late projects at work. It felt like a line worth keeping. With time, my energy shifted from protection to creation. I joined a hiking group through work, a mix of people who met every Saturday morning to climb the trails east of the city. On those hikes, I learned the rhythm of my own breath again, the steady pull of uphill effort, the satisfaction of a view earned step by step. There was laughter on those trails, stories told between huffs of air, and the simple kind of connection that didn't require explaining your history first. It was on one of those hikes that I met David. He was an environmental engineer with an easy smile and a habit of stopping to photograph wildflowers. We started talking about work then, about books, and by the time we reached the summit, it felt like we'd known each other longer than a morning. Our first date was coffee after another hike. Our second was dinner near the waterfront, where the air smelled like salt and grilled fish. I didn't tell him everything right away, just that my family and I were complicated. He nodded, not pressing for details. Complicated usually means there's history, he said, smiling gently. I'm good at being patient. As the months passed, patience turned into something steadier. He never tried to fix what had happened. He just listened when I spoke, and sometimes that was more healing than any advice could be. By early summer, the world felt wide again. The condo I'd been quietly saving for was no longer a distant dream. I found a small one near Green Lake, bright and open with a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a planter box. Signing those papers was its own quiet victory. I called Amy after the closing, and she cried happy tears. You built this, she said, every inch of it. When I moved in, I unpacked slowly, choosing where everything belonged with care. The first thing I set on the mantel was the photo frame Amy had given me that lonely Christmas, the one of us at graduation, smiling with the world still ahead of us. Beneath it, I placed a small notebook, the same one I'd used to track every dollar I'd once sent home. The pages were full, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a record of lessons learned. July brought warmth and long evenings. My siblings and I started having monthly video calls, just us, no parents. We talked about jobs, about how Katie was finishing her degree, about the new stray cat Josh had adopted. Sometimes there were silences that carried old pain, but they didn't last. We were building something honest, even if it was quiet. Then one morning in May, an email arrived from my father with the subject line, "Possible compromise." My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a message that sounded almost professional, stripped of affection. Your mother and I are willing to put the Christmas misunderstanding behind us. If you could consider resuming financial support at a reduced level, perhaps $1,000 monthly instead of $2,000, this would help us transition to our new budget. In exchange, we promise more transparency about family gatherings going forward. I read it twice, feeling the old ache rise, then settle. There was no apology, no ownership, only negotiation. I closed the message without replying. An hour later, a notification appeared from Mom, a Mother's Day card image, attached with a note about how much she missed her little girl. Again, no mention of what had been done, only nostalgia for the version of me that once said yes to everything. That night, I sat on my balcony, the air warm against my skin, and thought about what it meant to love people who refused to change. David joined me with 2 glasses of lemonade. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat beside me until I spoke. "They're still trying to bargain," I said. "They think love can be traded for money." He looked toward the city lights. "Then the best answer is to stop bargaining," he said softly. I nodded, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the lake. I realized I no longer needed them to understand my side. I just needed to live it. By August, I'd learned how to fill my life with quiet joys that didn't depend on anyone's approval. Mornings at the farmer's market, evenings cooking with David, weekend visits with Amy when she flew in for work. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching kids basic coding. Their excitement reminded me of what I'd once loved about technology. The promise of building something new from nothing. When fall came, I looked around my home and saw evidence of peace in the smallest things, the half-read book on the couch, the herb garden thriving on the balcony, the soft hum of the dishwasher after dinner. My world was smaller now, but it was real. One afternoon, while sorting mail at the kitchen counter, I found another envelope from home. The handwriting wasn't my parents', it was Katie's. Inside was a photo of her standing at her college graduation cap, tilted slightly, a wide smile across her face. On the back, she'd written, "I did it. Thank you for showing me how to stand up for myself." I set the photo against a vase of daisies on my table. The edges caught the light, and for a moment I saw the future instead of the past. The next morning, as the city woke around me, I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was painted with thin bands of pink and gold. Below, people hurried to work, dogs tugged at their leashes, a jogger waved at a neighbor. Life kept moving, as it always does. And somewhere in that movement I realized something gentle but certain. I had survived the storm that tried to make me smaller. What came next wasn't revenge, it was rebuilding. And for the first time in years, I was ready for it. Autumn came to Seattle with a kind of grace I hadn't noticed before. The days shortened, and the light through my living room windows turned gold in the late afternoon, soft enough to make everything look gentler. The air smelled faintly of rain and cedar, and the first chill of the season gathered around the edges of the day. It felt like the world itself was slowing down, finally breathing at the same pace I was. Life had become simple. Mornings started with coffee on the balcony, a wool blanket over my knees, and the quiet hum of the city below. I worked, I cooked, I hiked. On weekends, David and I would drive to the coast, stopping for coffee in small towns where no one knew our names. It was a peaceful rhythm, one that didn't need grand moments to feel full. I had learned that peace rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly and asks nothing but your attention. By November, it had been nearly a year since that Christmas. The memories had softened, though. Sometimes I'd still catch myself wondering how my parents spent their days now. Josh and Katie kept in touch regularly, both in ways that felt natural, no longer weighted by guilt. Our calls were easy, full of small victories, Katie's new internship, Josh's plan to take night classes. It was strange how honesty had rebuilt something stronger than obligation ever could. One gray afternoon, while sorting through mail at the kitchen counter, I found an envelope with handwriting I knew instantly. My mother's. For a moment, I considered setting it aside, letting it sit unopened with the grocery flyers and bills. But something in me, the part that had healed enough to stay steady, told me to read it. Her letter was longer than I expected. The first few lines were awkward, too, polished the way she wrote when she wanted to sound composed. Then, her tone shifted. She wrote about how empty the house had felt since I stopped coming home. How Dad had begun attending a local support group for retirees struggling with financial mismanagement. How she'd taken a part-time job at the library to fill the silence. Then came the words I hadn't expected to see. "We were wrong, Brittany, about so many things. We thought control would keep our family together, but all it did was break it apart. We can't undo what we did to you, but we want to understand how to do better." I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. There was no excuse in her words, no demand for forgiveness. Just a quiet acknowledgement of harm. I folded the letter carefully, and set it beside the vase of dried lavender on my counter. I didn't cry, but I felt something inside me unclench. That evening, I called Aunt Sandra. Her voice, warm and steady, as always, filled the line. "You sound lighter," she said, before I even told her about the letter. When I read her a few lines, she sighed softly. Sounds like she's starting to face herself. That's all anyone can really do after a long lie looks straight at it. I didn't know if I was ready to see my parents again, but I knew I didn't hate them. The anger had burned itself out months ago. What was left wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was distance made peaceful. Weeks passed, and Thanksgiving arrived. I hosted a small dinner at my condo, Amy, David, Aunt Sandra, and my siblings. The table was simple roasted vegetables, turkey cranberry sauce, and a pie that Katie and I baked together that morning while music played softly in the background. It was the first time I'd shared a holiday meal without the noise of obligation, the pretending, the unspoken tension that used to fill every pause. This was quiet, genuine laughter, and the kind of ease that feels like a soft light through the window. At one point, Josh raised his glass toward me. "To new traditions," he said with a grin, "and to the sister who taught us what boundaries actually mean." Everyone chuckled, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I wasn't used to being toasted for something that had once been considered rebellion. After dinner, while we stacked dishes and packed leftovers, I noticed how the house smelled rosemary, cinnamon, and something deeper, something calm. The scent of belonging, but this time, by choice. Later that week, a small package arrived from my parents. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before, old pictures from my childhood pages carefully arranged. On the last page, there was a new photo of my parents standing on the front porch, the same house that had once been the center of everything. Their smiles were smaller, more tentative, but real. Tucked behind the photo was a short note in my father's handwriting. "We're learning slowly. Thank you for showing us what that looks like. The porch light is on if you ever want to visit, not as the one who fixes everything, just as our daughter." I closed the album, my chest tight but steady. I didn't know when or if I'd go. But it didn't matter. The apology had arrived not as a request, but as a release. That was enough. As winter crept in, Seattle turned silver and still. Most evenings, David and I walked along the lake trail, bundled in scarves, our breath rising in small clouds. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand, and I'd think about how different this love was: quiet, patient, safe. I didn't need to earn it. I only needed to receive it. One night, as we stood by the water watching the city lights shimmer, he said, "You know, I think peace looks good on you." I smiled. It feels good too. By Christmas, I had no plans to fly anywhere. Instead, I invited Amy and a few friends for dinner. We cooked together, talked for hours, and when midnight came, I stepped onto the balcony. Snow had begun to fall again, light, steady, the kind that disappears the moment it touches your skin. Below, the city shimmered in its quiet holiday hush. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pictured that house in Arizona, the porch light my father mentioned. It no longer represented longing. It was simply a light, a sign that life went on, that people could change if they chose to. When I opened my eyes, I saw my reflection in the glass door, older somehow, but calmer. The woman looking back wasn't the daughter who begged for love through sacrifice. She was someone who had learned to keep her own light on. The months that followed carried that calm forward. Katie finished college and moved to Denver for her first job. Josh bought a small house outside Phoenix and sent photos of his backyard full of orange trees. Mom began sending occasional postcards instead of long letters, short and kind, each one ending with the same line, "We're proud of you." By spring, I had started a new mentorship program at work teaching young women how to build careers in tech without losing themselves to guilt or burnout. It wasn't something I'd planned, it just felt right. Every time I spoke to them, I saw a little of my younger self in their faces, hopeful, eager to please, unaware of how easily boundaries could blur. I told them what I had learned the hard way, that love is not a debt, that kindness should never cost you your peace. On the first warm evening of April, I sat outside as the sun dipped behind the buildings. The air smelled of wet pavement and lilacs from the neighbor's garden. In the distance, the city lights began to glow one by one, quiet and certain. It struck me then that peace doesn't arrive as a grand finale. It seeps in quietly, filling the cracks that pain once occupied. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing what happens next. I leaned back in my chair, watching the last trace of sunlight fade into the horizon. Somewhere, wind chimes stirred faintly on a nearby balcony. The world felt wide again, full of possibility. Some wounds, I've learned, don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally stop needing them to define us. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to rebuild your peace one quiet day at a time, share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for spending this time with me. Remember, peace isn't given. It's something you decide to keep.